Thank you so much, Rajesh Bhai. May I now invite the architect of the building, Professor Christopher Benninger, to share his thoughts on this occasion. Professor Christopher Benninger.
This is a rather difficult moment for me because I came to India 53 years ago, almost to this date. It was late October. And when I came to India, I came to this spot. So I find it a very emotional experience to come back to this spot 53 years later to a building that I designed. I think as a youngster, you would never imagine such things as life goes by. But I thought, okay, I have to talk today, so what do I talk about? I thought I would talk about transformation. I thought I would talk about how institutions transform individuals, transform cities, transform nations. Now, particularly School of Architecture, CEPT Institute, CEPT University, has been one of the most transformational institutions in the world. Now, transforming individuals. Let me tell you my story. My father was a professor of economics. He founded an institute in Medellin, Colombia, called the Colegio. And when I was young, I used to go to Colombia. And for the first time, I was confronted with poverty, exploitation, third world problems, as we used to call them. And that put a little bug in my mind that I was interested in development studies as well as architecture. Then when I was in college, I had a roommate, Mir Mubashir Ali from East Pakistan. And Mir and I became very close friends. So later in my life, I applied for a Fulbright fellowship to go actually to Bangladesh, at that time East Pakistan. And I won the fellowship, but then the government said you can't go there because there's too much violence and there's a revolution taking place there. So some of my professors at Harvard said, well, we used to live in Paris with this guy called Doshi, who worked with us with Corbusier. Why don't you go to Ahmedabad? So I came here and spent a year here teaching. The first time I ever taught was a studio here. I don't mind saying in that one studio, I had people like Suresh Berry, who became a very well-known architect. I had Amita Rajay. I had Mickey and Madhuri Desai, K.C. Daroga, just in a small studio of 12 people. Shalat became the principal of MS University of Baroda. So this institute put out people just in that one class who had an impact on society. It transformed them. So while I was here, I received a telegram that I was accepted for a position I had applied for to teach at Harvard University. So I go back to Harvard. I had been working on a PhD at MIT in urban planning, and I'm happily teaching there. And after a year or so, I became a tenured assistant professor. Now, at that time, a tenured professor was a life-term employment. You would have to do something pretty scandalous to be asked to leave the university. So my father, who was a professor, was happy. Everybody was happy. Christopher, age 26, 27, became a tenured professor at Harvard. Then along comes a person called Balkrishna Doshi. He said, you know, when you were in Ahmedabad, we drafted out a proposal to start a school of planning. And we sent it to the Ford Foundation, to the government of Gujarat in India, and they want to do it now. But our problem is there are only 3 qualified planners in the whole state of Gujarat. Merwada was the chief town planner of the state, and Deshpande was the chief, Dr. Deshpande, transportation planner, and I think Apte was head of the Gandhinagar project. So there was nobody, so they said we can't start the school because everybody has said there has to be somebody with a degree in town planning. So I thought about that, and a few days later, Preston Andrade from the Ford Foundation came through. And he put a notice that anybody who would like to talk to me, I'm from the Ford Foundation in Delhi, so I thought I would just pop in and say hi to this man, who I'd met once in India. So we chatted, and I left the room, and I came back to the room, put my head in the door, and I said, incidentally, if there's any opportunities in the promised land, let me know. He said, are you serious? I said, yes, I'm serious now. He said, come in. He said, but you're just started becoming, you're a tenured professor at Harvard. You finished all your coursework for a PhD. You've passed your exams for the PhD. You just have to write your thesis. Would you really do them? I said somehow my year in Ahmedabad in 1968-69, I fell in love with the city, and I fell in love with India, and I fell in love with all the people I met. I would really like to go back, but let me talk to my professors. Now, interestingly enough, all of my senior professors at Harvard and MIT said, get out of here while you can. You're 28 years old. If you can found an institute at age 28, get out of here. Go to India and start the School of Planning. So here I come. I came, first of all, overland. Took a Harvard charter flight to London. Came from London all the way to Bombay, Stockton. Spent 8 weeks teaching a studio with Doshi here. And we discussed the whole idea. And I said, okay, I'm quitting my job in Cambridge, and I'll be over here by September. So I left and came back here. Met interesting people. Met Louis Kahn, who was working at IM, of course Doshi, and many transformational people here on the faculty. Doshi obviously was one, Hasmukh Patel was another, Paraji Sagra, many other people in this city started having a big impact on me. By the time we set up the school and say about 5 years had passed, I didn't want to go back to America. So I decided to stay in India, and I've spent, since 1971, I've been in India for more than 50 years. Why am I in India for 50 years? Because of this institution. This institution transformed me personally from somebody who could have still been teaching at Harvard as a retiring tenured professor, probably written some books and maybe done some buildings on the side, but I would have been sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But because of the School of Architecture, because of CEPT, because of the university, because of the people here, it transformed my life. And I know there are people sitting in the audience whose lives were also transformed. So that was kind of a story. But the second story I want to tell is how institutions like CEPT transform cities. Now, when I came to Ahmedabad, it was a mill town, maybe 100 textile mills, give or minus some, and a trading center, a city of workers, a city of banyas, a city of people who were good at making money. But something else was happening in 1971. You had Atira had been recently found. You had BM Institute of Mental Health. You had NID. You had CEPT. You had all kinds of institutions blooming over here. This mill town suddenly became an idea center. It became a place generating knowledge, generating action. People from all over the world started to come to this mill town. And the town was literally transformed by people like the Lalbhai family, like other people. Chimanbai Lalbhai brought Corbusier to do the Sanskar Kendra and Tagore Hall. And you had people really contributing to this city. And the city was transformed, I think, by the patrons and by the institutions and by the institution builders. It's a very small percentage of the population of the city literally transformed the city. And the people who studied here, they've had a great impact on the city as well. I won't go into the details, but my friend Basada is sitting here. I think almost single-handedly he wrote the dossiers to make this a UNESCO heritage city. So that's an example of how one person changed the city and put it on the world map. And there are many others here. Kirti Shah at Asag and Rajesh at Vikas made a huge impact in the city. I don't need to mention our president. His impact in the city is amazing, and I think it's a model for the whole country. So institutions like CEPT have an impact on individuals. Many, many of them, probably 1,000 people like me have been, their whole lives have been molded and changed by CEPT University. They have an impact on the city. The rapid bus transport system here was started by Srivanan, one of the faculty members here, and that's spread across the whole country. Which brings me to the third point. Institutions like CEPT have an impact on nation building. When I came, as I said, villages in India had no contact with cities. Things changed, it became globalized, and suddenly we were connected with the villages, vice versa, through internet. Another thing is that if you see the books on architecture and planning that have been published in the last 20 years, see the list of the authors. No? I would say 90% of those authors were either students here or taught here. 90%, you take books of any depth on architecture or planning, they were published by people who taught here or studied here. That's a huge impact on the nation. That's a huge change. I always said that CEPT is the best school of architecture. I've been on the board of governors of SPA Delhi. I've been very deeply involved with JJ School of Architecture. I think these three undoubtedly are the top institutions of architecture. But without question, CEPT is the leading institute of architecture, planning, design. And I think we should all be proud of that this institution has had an impact on the entire nation, the way people think, the way people talk about architecture. The other thing is that people like Bimal have done projects like the Sabarmati River, which I think is a great project, like the Central Vista, I think is another great project. I did the capital plan of Bhutan and built the Supreme Court there and other buildings now. So these kind of projects evoke debate. Suddenly, in the last 5 years, you find for the first time in India, design has become a topic for societal debate, political debate, economic debate. Now, sometimes we as designers feel uncomfortable. Even this complex, when we started it, there was a huge amount of debate over it now. But I think it's fantastic that people stopped talking about all kinds of social issues. I mean, they kept on talking about them, but they started talking about design. And they started debating that. And so design became an issue in the country for the first time. And I think it's people here at CEPT, people who taught here, people who work here, who have had an impact on the nation. And I think that's very important. Now, it was actually a great honor to be asked by the Brahmabhatt family and Dr. Patel and the Lalbhais to design this complex. As I said, my career started here. And I think I'm the only person, I dare say this, I think I've been involved with CEPT since 1971 continuously, in some capacity of the other, either starting the School of Planning, or they made me a distinguished professor, along with Doshi and Dr. Alag, and then I came back in the board, and now I've designed this. So really, for half a century, I have been involved in this institute, and it's been a cornerstone of my life, actually. I think it's very important. So let me close by thanking a few people. I hope I don't miss them, but there are people sitting here, like Dilip Patel, who was my guide when I was designing this on lots of practical things. Arthur is sitting over here. He was chairman as a faculty member. Arthur Duff was chairman of the committee that guided me on this. I had people from my staff like Rahul Sati, who's sitting here, one of my directors, and Shivaji Karkar is sitting here someplace. He was the man who did I think he's drawn every brick in this building. He's drawn every single brick. And we've argued and discussed, and we've come here during construction and changed many, many things. Ismit Patel, she designed the furniture. Now, in case you think that she designed the furniture because she's the wife of the president of the university, let me take that idea out of your mind. Ismit did her training under me 41 years ago. And when I suggested to Bimal, I want my Ismit, not your Ismit, to do the furniture, he said, no, I don't think it's a good idea. I said, I don't care what is your good idea. She's a designer I've known for 4 decades plus. She has to do my furniture. So Ismit made a huge contribution. Ashish Jani was on this site every day, working with PSP Patel group, and they had a great group of people working here. Lalji Bai and Kalji Ben, they were on the site till sometimes midnight. The contractors team were here till midnight. They used to sit and have dinner on a table out by where you see this water tank. Bhargav Tiwar was very helpful. I would forget people, but my structural designer, Anil Shah, is important, and Pramod Singh, who did the MEP, and Sri Ramji, who did the acoustics, were all people who were part of the team. So there was a big team working on this and the studios across the street. And we tried many things. We tried casting murals in concrete. We put colored glass. You'll see if you turn off the lights, you get a lot of interesting light coming in. So I think this is the 25th amphitheater or auditorium that I've designed. And I honestly think it's the best one. I don't hesitate to say that. You feel close to the people in the back row. You feel close to the people you're talking to. And I think it's something very unique. And I think it was because of the partnership between the clients and between our team and the contractor. So thank you very much. It's a great honor to have designed this complex, and thank you for inviting me.